In this part of the build series, I'm going to be covering the wiring of the Voron 0.2. This is going to be a little bit different than a stock Voron 0.2 build. The main differences that you may have on a stock build would be a DC bed. I'm using an AC bed. The second thing is going to be the toolhead wiring. Since I'm running CAN bus, I'll be using a transceiver. If you're not running a CAN bus toolhead, you're going to connect everything from the loom to the board. And we're up to 185 in the manual, and we're going to be sliding this deck piece in and then basically bolting it down to these extrusions here. So you might have to, you're very likely going to have to adjust these. So make sure you go in and adjust those so that they can slot in. So I'll go ahead and do that now. The preloaded nuts should match these extrusions, the little spots in the openings here. And here's how I'm going to do it to line it up. I've just got the deck panel here. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it initially. Let's try to do my best to line it up. This one's almost all the way at the top. Almost. And this is the Bowden side. Not that I'll be using a Bowden, but might as well have it there. And then we'll confirm it on this side. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I can work with that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now that those are all where they need to be, go ahead and slide that over. Yep, that looks good. Now go ahead and just sink it. And this is also where you'll find out how accurate your extrusions are. Mine look to be pretty good. And there's a little bit of wiggle room in these. So now you're going to use M36s to close these off. I've got my M36s here, so I'll just go ahead and start putting these guys in. Okay, I've got all these screws in and I'm ready to start mounting. Something that I like that's new in the Voron 0.2 are these DIN clips. And the way these work is this connects to your mount for your pie, and then you just kind of go in here and you can snap them off and on. So that makes it really easy to connect and disconnect. So in order to do these, you're going to need your M2 10 self-tapping, and you're going to go with the fourth hole down and the bottom one. And then these are going to self-tap right into these mounts here. And the way you're going to orient this is like I've got shown here. And then you're just going to go ahead and line those up. And then just go ahead and sink them. Okay, now you've got that assembled. And I'll be running the Raspberry Pi and the SKR Pico. I'm going to need two, and they're the same mount. And then you're going to need two of these DIN clips. I'm not sure why I have two different ones. I think maybe the part changed a little bit from the time I printed it, but both of these work the same way. You just go ahead and come in here. This will be mounted to your VHB like that, and then these will just snap right in. And before I put the other these initial pieces down, I'm going to go ahead and run this channel, and I'm going to use VHB tape and put this here. This is something that was made popular by LDO kits. I just like how it keeps the wires nice and tucked away. Before you tape everything down, it's a good idea to just kind of eyeball it visually. And I think that's going to be fine. I've still got some room down here if I want to do anything else in here, which I may at some point. But that looks pretty good. The other thing that I'm going to have to put down is this transceiver that connects into here through UART. And for these mounts, just go ahead and put M2 self-tapping screws in here. You're supposed to use 10s, but unfortunately, as you can see here, they're a little too long. So I would say 8s would probably be better if you have them. But I know the build doesn't call for those, so just watch your fingers while you're screwing those in. Make sure you don't poke yourself. So I've got my VHB on here now, and I'm going to just kind of drop it in place with everything connected. One trick that I've learned with this VHB is if you use like an X-Acto knife, you can just get under that tape real easily, and you're not fighting with it as much. So sometimes this stuff can be a real pain. But once you lift that edge just enough, it makes it a little bit easier to take off. So now we'll go ahead and set it in here. Now the manual, it has you place them a little left to the screw. But since I'm using this channel to hide my wiring, I'm going to go to the right of the screw. And I'm actually going to, but I would kind of aim for this to center it right around that screw. I'm going to go a little bit below it. So I'm going to go right about there. Based on how you installed it, you should be able to remove this pretty easily. You can just come under there and then lift this out to remove it. And you might want to pay attention to that based on how you think you're going to want it installed. Now the reality is you're probably not going to be taking these off all that often. Okay, now I'm just going to repeat with the Raspberry Pi piece. And I've got this set up where I'm going to have it with the USBs on the bottom, which is also how it's recommended in the manual. On this one, when you're putting it in, make sure that you've got enough clearance to be able to remove the SD card here. So that's important in case you ever have to change them out. There we go. Here's about the amount of VHB tape that you need to put on, and just go ahead and remove the backing and then just set it down. Also going to go ahead and use this 5-volt converter. If you're like me, you probably forgot to put in the preloaded nuts because this was designed for the V0. With the V02, you can actually power your Pi off of your SKR Pico board. Now I'm not going to do that because I'm using CAN bus, which has a different connector that connects to the UART where the two 5-volt things come out. So I decided I'm just going to go ahead and use this to power the Pi. There are other options, but I'm just going to go ahead and VHB tape it. It should be fine. And now I'm going to go ahead and put this AC inlet that I've pre-wired. Your AC inlet may look similar, it may look different, but it has to fit in here, and I've just kind of got everything wired here. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my wires through here. I'm probably going to rotate it like this. That way the switch is on the very outside. And it should just snap right in, which it did. So it looks good. And at this point, I've got most of everything on the bottom done. One thing that my machine has as well is this SSR, because I am using an AC bed. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that, but if you're using an AC bed, you would also want to find a spot to mount this. Most people are going to be using DC beds, and those are very simple. You won't need one of these, and you'll just wire directly to power pins here. I went ahead and got all the AC side done. So I've got my line, neutral, and earth connected. I've connected it up for my AC bed wiring to the SSR, and I ran the cables from the bottom. So white goes to neutral in my case, and then the black wire that I had goes to the SSR. And I've used a Wago to secure that, just for convenience. I also ran my 24-volt plus and minus. We've pretty much got everything done. I recommend using some zip ties. Try to keep this nice and tidy. Mine's okay, it's probably not the cleanest, but what you don't want is for this to hang out and dangle. So I've got all that pretty much to the point where it should stay and not move around. And step one here is I've connected the power to the SKR, which is the red and black plus and minus. And make sure, double check you get all your polarities correct. You don't want to, these are the main things, you don't want to get these backwards. And you can also see how I'm just routing wires through here to kind of keep all the mess contained. That way it's not everywhere else. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and crimp the wires onto these motors here. And these motors are going to connect into these top connectors here. I'm going to check the continuity of my pairs on my motor wiring before I connect them. You want to have pins 1, 2, 3, and 4 kind of all in a row. And the first 2 pins should be in a pair, and the second 2 pins should be in a pair. Now luckily, I've got a spec sheet here, and it even includes the color of the leads, but it's always a good idea to double check these. So you want to have the first 2 pins as a pair. I'm going to check, so in this case it says red and blue should be connected, and that would be the B plus motors. So the way that I do this to confirm it is I'll take the red lead wire, and I'll take the blue lead wire, and I'll check for continuity. And if I hear a beep, which I do, that means they're connected. So that means that is a pair, so that means the other 2 have to be a pair as well. Now, if you have a multimeter, if you're not familiar with one, you should have this little symbol with a ohm sign as well as a little beeper, and that's how you can check it. So hopefully you've got that on your multimeter. This one I like, the Klein Tools multimeter. This is a good general purpose one. Okay, I went ahead and cut my wires, did the trimmer, and I've got a little bit of length, and I'm going to use that to crimp on. You're also going to need some 4-pin JST connectors, and I've got a few of those left. You also need the pins to do the crimping. I'll go through that process real quick. And the first thing I'm going to do is get my Engineer PA09s, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set the JST XH pin right in the 1.4 slot, pushing the piece with the pins here all the way, or the outside opening, the large opening, all the way to the end. I'm going to squeeze it a little bit just to get it to stay in there. And then once I do that, I'm going to take one of my wires and I'm going to insert it in there so the wire goes all the way in. And I'll just go ahead and apply some pressure, crimp it, and then I'll double check it with the wiggle test. It's not moving around. And then I'm going to close these pins a little bit, and then I'm going to insert the larger pins into the 1.9 connector spot. So you can see there, hopefully. And then I'm just going to apply a little bit of pressure and crimp that end. And that should do it. Sometimes your pins may break on the ends, but as long as everything is staying in there good, then you should be okay. There are actually different size JST-XH pins that you can get where these aren't quite as long, but these are kind of general purpose ones made for a little bit thicker wires. So that's why you may see like some of these crimps not quite perfect when you close it on the jacket. This end piece here is really meant for the jacket. So I'm going to go ahead and do the next one. I'll just rinse and repeat this process until I get all 4 pins on. I've got all 4 pins done. Now I'm going to insert them to make sure they're in pair order before I put them in the connector. It doesn't really matter what order the pairs are in because you can always switch those. But black and green are a pair, so I'm going to go ahead and put those in first. So I'm going to do black, and make sure that your little pin here, the little tab, is on the right side. So I'll do black, and then I'll do green. And if you mess this up, it's not a huge deal. You can always come back and remove them later. So black and green are in. And the next pair that I'm going to do is red and blue. And the nice thing about this is if you need to reverse the motor, you can definitely do that in the firmware. So that's why I say the black, green, red, and blue order isn't as important. But the black and green and 2 pins side by side and the red and blue and 2 pins side by side is critical. Because if you have that out of order, your motors are you're not going to be connected right, and you're going to have to adjust these pins. If they're connected wrong, you'll know because you'll get a really horrible sounding motor noise. The one I just did is the B motor, and that one's going to go in this middle connector here. And there we go. Connects just fine. And then the A motor is going to go here, which is this one. So we got B, A, and then extruder would be here. But since I'm running a CAN bus toolhead, I'm not going to use it. And then Z is going to be down here. And I'm just going to repeat the same process for the A motor. I'm just going to make sure my cable's a little bit longer, and then I can route it how I want. And I'm going to wire it the same exact way. And I've gone ahead and connected the other motor. Now we've got 2 on. Okay, I've got everything connected up on the main board. I'm getting ready to move on to the toolhead. So I've got my USB connected to my Raspberry Pi for power. I'm also going to need to connect a USB from the Pi to the SKR, which I have not done yet. But other than that, everything should be in here. So I've got my Z end stop, my bed thermistor, my RGB for the bed. Make sure that when you do this, you've got all these pins in the correct order, because if you don't, you can cause problems. So the ground, the black cable is the very top pin here. The signal is the middle, and then the 5-volt is this one. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. All right, I've got my input, my power input right here, 24 volt. And then I am running a AC bed, and I'm using these pins here. You will probably not be using these. You'll just be using one of these for your heated bed. And then if you are running something other than a CAN bus, you'll use another one of these for the hot end. I've also got my CAN receiver down here, or transceiver. So I've got that connected via UART, and then here I'm going to be connecting, if you can see that, I went ahead and VHB taped this down, but here I'm going to connect my high and low for the CAN signal. I like how all this channel hides the wiring. I think it looks pretty good. I went ahead and zip tied this as well. So if you are running CAN bus, this is about all you're going to have connected. If you're not running CAN bus and using everything from the toolhead, you're going to have to connect your extruder motor here. You're also going to have a couple of part fans that you're going to have to connect to. And those part fans are going to be, I believe, these three up here. So since, yeah, you can see there's a fan 0, fan 1, and fan 2. So just look at the manual for those if you're going to be connecting to the board directly. The other thing that you need to do is you need to put some jumpers on these motors here because we're using sensorless homing. And I've went ahead and installed the jumpers on there. You can see them. You do not need jumpers on the other motors, so it should look like that. I think the split loom is the best because you can just kind of undo it like that and then just kind of start going there. And just take your finger once you get it in there and just kind of run it down. Should be able to do it like that and it should go right in. So that's a pretty good start. I'm going to slide it up a little bit and try to secure it here. Okay, I've got it secured at this point at the tool head, and then I've went ahead and just inserted the wires into my wire loom. And you really don't need to worry about going too far with this. I'm probably just going to bring it down. And then we're going to have the deck piece, and there's also a strain relief here that we can use that we're going to mess with here in a second. You want to make sure that you've got, go to all the way to the corner. You also don't want this too high. I know depending on the height that you go with this bend, you're going to have to worry about clearance on your top hat, and you don't want it rubbing. Before you kind of secure things down, I would err on the side of having it lower rather than higher, because that's going to be really secured there. You're not going to need to worry too much about this bend, so that should be fine. Okay, I skipped ahead a little bit, and I just went ahead and added this cable pass-through. I like having this on here so I can easily kind of set my umbilical here where I need it, so I'll go ahead and do that. There's a couple slots on the sides for zip ties that you can use. And I'll go ahead and put a zip tie in here just to show you how to do it. It should fit right in. Yep. And when you're doing this, just make sure you've, like I was talking about earlier, you don't want to go too high. So just get it where it's probably maybe a couple inches above, right about there is what I'm going to shoot for. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten it down. I'll add another zip tie. And at this point, I've got all my wiring in here, so I'm going to continue connecting it. I'll go ahead and cut my loom. I'm going to go really anywhere once you're past this is fine. Since I'm actually not going to be going to the board with this loom, I'm going to go a little bit lower. The other thing is I want to make sure I can put my tray over it. And this does fit pretty well, so I think I'll just go ahead and cut it maybe right about here. I've got this can receiver over here, and I'm going to put some small ferrules on the ends of these just to help keep them into these screw terminals. And I'll just show how I do this real quick. Just get a nice long length of wire. That ought to do it. And I've selected these ferrules here, which I believe are just right. And I will crimp. Yep, so those are good. Now these are probably a little too long for the terminal, so I'm going to trim them down with some scissors, which that's totally fine. This is probably optional, but I like you get a square crimp, and that's designed for those terminals rather than a round wire. So it's stranded. If you clamp down a stranded wire, it just may not stay in as well. I'm going to cut them down a little bit because they're about double the length they need to be. So I'm just going to use a pair of scissors and then kind of aim for the halfway point. There we go. In my case, the high is yellow, which is this terminal here that I'm going into. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that in and tighten it down, make sure it's good and tight. And then I'll do the same thing with the green one, which is the can low. Those are both in, nice and flush. They're not moving around at all. And if they are, make sure you tighten them down just a little bit. And the last thing I need to do are connect my tool head, which is CAN bus, to my 24 volt power supply, plus and minus. So the plus is the red, the minus is the black. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. I'm just going to stack these terminals together. This is probably not the best way. A better way would be to use Wagos and split this off, but there's not a whole lot of room here. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and connect these directly to the terminals here. Okay, I've now got those connected, and I've At this point, make sure you double check all your wiring. Your red and black should be only on the red should be on the V plus, the black should be on the V minus. Your earth wire should be here on this earth sign. And then you should have your neutrals, which in my case are white, on the N, and your lines, which would be black in my case, on the L's. So also double check if you have an SSR, if you have a 5-volt buck converter like I've got here, make sure the same thing, red and black. Make sure you double check the polarity. That's the most important thing, because you do not want to get those reversed. And you also want to check your polarity here. So you should have red and black. This will be 24 volt positive, 24 volt negative. And make sure you don't forget your Z motor like I did. So I've got pretty much everything plugged in now and ready to go and power up. And I just went ahead and powered it up, and I've got lights on my Pi as well as my SKR, so that's a good sign. That means everything powered up, and so far so good, no magic smoke. I've also got a red light on my tool head. And now that everything's wired up, we're gonna get ready to get printing.